Great. Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. So I'm Mackenzie. I'm a research scientist at Adobe, and I'll be presenting our work on WasteBanned today. And I wanted to mention that this is Ruo Wang's master's thesis work at MIT, and we're really sorry she wasn't able to be here today, but I'll be presenting on her behalf. So it's no secret that fast fashion produces a lot of textile waste. But recently there have been many new technologies and design approaches aimed at helping to reduce the environmental impacts of fashion. And there's a wide range of things that fall under this umbrella, from things like more environmentally friendly new materials like lyocell, to a broader ecosystem of changes like considering things like circular design and material reuse. And these are all part of this broader landscape of strategies for reducing the environmental costs of fashion, while maintaining our desire to create clothes that look good. So many garments are made through what is called a cut and sew process, which involves taking 2D panels that are cut from sheets of fabric and then assembling them into the 3D garment. Now, this process tends to produce a lot of waste because all of these areas between the kind of odd-shaped panels are often just thrown away. It's really hard to reuse them effectively. So to design a garment, typically fashion designers will start by sketching out the appearance, and then pattern cutters go through that process of designing the 2D pattern panels that I mentioned. And this divide between the visual appearance and the manufacturing considerations contributes to these inefficient layouts and ultimately all of that waste. And so one particularly interesting design approach that we came across to reducing or even eliminating these wasted areas is called zero-waste fashion design. And so, well, these types of zero-waste garments have existed for a very long time across many different cultures. More recently, there's been kind of this emergence of studying this area more formally within fashion design. So zero-waste clothing aims to use all of the available fabric, and they treat cutting out the pattern as an integral part of the design process. So you're essentially considering the layout alongside its appearance. So while in conventional non-zero waste garments like this dress, the process of making edits is relatively easy because you have all of this leftover material. So with that waste also comes some flexibility to make changes. But for zero-waste garments, making edits is quite challenging. For example, in this dress, if I wanted to make the sleeve longer, I'd also be cutting into the body area, which would affect the fit. So you can see that this editing process is highly constrained. And this kind of use everything property means that we need to be really careful as we cut the panels and adjust the edges to not affect the neighboring pieces. So we outlined a set of constraints involved in this kind of use everything mentality. And in practice, we use a solver in FreeCAD, which is a general purpose CAD tool to check that the constraints are met. And we just focus on a subset of the constraints that are relevant to designing 2D panels. And these are very kind of low-level things like making sure that edges are horizontal or parallel, or in a lot of cases that they're equal so that we can sew them together smoothly. And then we built a UI on top of this to help users create and modify zero-waste patterns. So this is our WasteBanned UI. We see a pattern editing view on the left and a pattern alignment view on the right. And so the sewing pattern is initialized as a rectangle. You'll see the solid black lines are our panels, and then we add some seam allowances, which are the areas you need to kind of stitch the fabric together in the red dotted lines. So I'll show you the process of making a simple skirt where we'll initialize the rectangle to be the size of our available fabric, which here happens to be 50 by 30 inches. And then we'll pick our body model. So we're already in cut mode, so we'll look at our pattern editing view, and we'll make a cut to split our fabric rectangle into 2 panels. And we support 3 types of cuts, including these edge-to-edge cuts, as well as these partial slits, and breakpoints. And we see that the edge-to-edge cut is really what we want here because it cuts into 2 smaller panels. So we're just going to go back and take this initial cut. Then we'll add another edge-to-edge cut to make another part of our skirt. And then we'll label the 3 panels that we've created so that we can help keep track of these later. So then in the next step, we'll look at the pattern alignment view, and we'll see that we have 4 areas in our UI. We have the front and the back, which is where we'll place our garment panels. We also have a bin for add-ons like pockets and belts, which we don't simulate, as well as an area to hold any waste that we do create in case you want to make low-waste garments instead. So then we can just align our panels to the body. And then this will give us a sense of kind of this initial geometry that we've created and where the panels will go in the end. So now we'll prepare to sew the panels together via assigning seam correspondences. So we'll return to our pattern editing view in sew mode, and we'll click and select edges to sew them together. So I compare these edges across either view, and we'll see that the 2 edges in red are also have now become equal length, as well as the 2 side seams shown in pink and the center seams in blue, and these all correspond to parts that will be sewn together in our garment. So at this point, the skirt's looking a little wide in the front and a little skinny in the back, so we'll adjust our pattern. And then we also want to make sure that the panels are roughly equal size on the back, left, and right, and so that the center seam will be actually centered in our garment. So we add the equal length constraint to those edges. And then we'll go ahead and click Simulate and view our skirt in Blender. We can then go back and export our sewing pattern so that we know how to actually cut it in our fabric. So I wanted to just show a couple of the designs that users created in WasteBanned. So we focused our study primarily on editing existing zero waste patterns to fit different bodies and also to adjust the style of existing garments. For example, this is a pair of pants that someone adjusted in order to fit them. A different user created a strap top that they also adjusted to their own size, as well as an overshirt that was slightly more complicated with additional things like sleeves, as well as a sweatshirt like this that had many different pieces. We also allowed users to adapt some existing patterns by adding on different stylistic elements or combining multiple patterns together. For example, they made this little jumpsuit from adapting a pair of pants pattern. And also they created this wide sleeve top, which was adapted from a t-shirt, and they were able to create kind of more of the shaping from those triangles you see in the middle of the pattern. We also had one participant who had quite a bit of experience in fashion design, and so they created this design from scratch and sewed it. And so this one was really interesting because in many cases, zero waste garments are very kind of billowy. And in this case, this user was actually able to create something a little bit more tailored, which is quite challenging to do. So as you can see, zero waste garment design is this really highly constrained puzzle. And one of the limitations of our current approach is only supporting straight seams. And so while many patterns do only use these types of seams, we do see more advanced patterns with curves like this dress and this bag. And so in practice, we approximated all these curves as straight seams, but in the future, it'd be nice to support these additional types of garments. And matching these straight seams is relatively straightforward, but you can imagine that it gets quite tricky when you're trying to align curves because there's many possible seams with the same curvature that would yield very different garments. And I think another interesting area of future work here is thinking about how to bridge some of this conventional garment design with zero waste design to land somewhere in the middle, creating lower waste garments, right? Conventional garments have a lot more range of styles that you can achieve compared to zero waste, but obviously you want to think about being a little more resourceful. So one of the things I think is most important about this general approach to zero waste sewing is that it encourages incorporating material awareness much earlier in the design process. So instead of planning your design, going out and then sourcing your materials, and then creating the garment, zero waste design lets us push these material considerations earlier. And this enables us to think about using materials as part of the design process, and lets us think even about using things like scrap materials to influence our design. And this materials-first approach is certainly not limited to clothing. It shifts the mindset of going out and finding the material to support a given design, and instead thinking about actually driving the design by the materials you have on hand. And more broadly, I think that thinking about material as a source of design inspiration, rather than this limiting constraint, can open the door to potentially new types of design processes and outputs. So with that, I want to thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.
Fantastic presentation, Mackenzie. So from the audience, do we have any questions? Okay, while you are thinking about something good to ask, I actually have a question. So I just had a chat with Wendy Mackay, and we talked a lot about designers and users, right? And this is an extremely fascinating project. But for textile design, I guess there is in the prototyping phase, so to say, in the designing phase, right? I guess some perception about the materials can trigger creativity and can help to get to greater designs. So I wonder if you're maybe looking into or interested into more physicalization of this design, right? At the moment, it's a digital tool. Could we also bring this into the real world, maybe with projections or so? It would be fantastic.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think it's one that's also, right, there's, this comes up in a lot of these types of textile tools, and I think there's always a question of, right, when do you simulate and when do you put it in the physical world, right? And you see even in garment design right now, there's a lot of, right, push toward better simulation, and obviously you want to not, waste materials, you want to get a good sense of what it looks like, so you want to simulate. But there's also a lot of, in smaller scale productions, right, and kind of more small scale sewing, right, where you are actually literally just taking fabric and putting it on the mannequin, and you're seeing how it drapes, you're touching it, you're feeling it, and I think that's also a really important part of the process. And so I think it's really interesting to think about how to incorporate some of the benefits of both, maybe, of getting, not having to actually waste the material, not having to go out and buy it or acquire it before you start, and still getting a sense of what it looks like. But I like your suggestion of maybe some sort of AR or combination of this digital and physical reality to be able to see it right there in front of you without really digging into what you have. So I think it's a great direction and cool idea. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Yu from Zara University. I guess follow up to Michael's question, would it be possible to have something that supports a reverse design? Because I think coming from a non-textile background, I have I wouldn't know how to draw the patterns on the first, a planar things to then simulate the final outcome, but I do know what kind of dress or shirt I want. Would it be possible for the user to input the final output, and then for maybe there's a tool to simulate, optimize what kind of layout, what cuts that would be possible to make that final outcome?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good observation. I think that's something that, right, one of the kind of key challenges in a lot of these tools, right, is designing across 2D and 3D, and kind of, it's hard to imagine what these flat things will look like on the body. But to the point about reverse engineering, though, I think that is something that, right, often when you learn to sew garments, one of the lessons you do is you take your favorite thing and you rip out all the seams and you flatten it out and you see what it looks like, and you then figure out how to take different fabric or put it back together and so forth. And so I think that it is it would be really helpful to have more infrastructure and more tools around being able to take this end thing you like and maybe even digitally being able to unroll it, unpack it, and get a sense of how it was made in that context as well. But yeah, it's a key problem. Thank you.
All right, let's thank Mackenzie once again.